I'm Laura Blumenthal on the Berkshire Youth podcast, and joining me today is Sarah Emery, the CEO of Berkshire Youth. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Laura, for having me.
I know that Berkshire Youth was founded in 1940 to champion young people across Berkshire, but can you tell me a bit more about what Berkshire Youth does, what its aim is, and what was your journey to becoming its CEO? Why is youth work so important to you?
Yeah, this year Berkshire Youth celebrates 85 years as an organisation, which is a really great milestone, I think, for any organisation, but I think especially in this current financial climate. I think charities are struggling, so reaching 85 years is really important to us. Berkshire Youth was founded in post-war Britain and was really about communities helping young people to fulfill their potential and to become the best version of themselves. And in 85 years, not a lot has changed really. We are still based very much in our communities, and we run a range of services and offers for young people that support them to fulfill their potential. And that looks really different in different places. So that might look like a youth worker being in a school, it might look like doing detached youth work in parks and open spaces, as well as opening up safe spaces for young people to go, youth clubs, projects, running activities. So really offering young people positive things to do outside their sort of educational environment and outside of home life. In terms of my journey, so I've been with Berkshire Youth 20 years this year. So I joined as a sports development officer, and I've worked for the organisation for those 20 years, and became CEO nearly 3 years ago now.
And what is it about working with young people and supporting them that matters so much to you? Because you've done this for well over 20 years now, Sarah.
Yeah, I think young people are often underrepresented in our communities in terms of decisions that are made about them, and made for our communities. Young people often struggle to have a voice in communities. We look at the voting population, and often, populist politics doesn't serve the needs of those young people. So I think it's really important that organisations like ourselves exist, along with other, national and other local organisations, to really champion the voice of young people. I think often young people are misrepresented in our press. They get, a bit of a rough deal. Often, we see the negative side of our youth population splashed across the media. So I think at any given point, if you looked at the last time a news article mentioned a young person, it will be to do with a crime of some sort or some kind of negative thing. Whereas we know that actually that represents such a small number of our population, less than 5% of all young people are ever involved in the criminal justice system, yet we're seeing the narrative being told in a really different balance. So I think it's really important that young people feel that they have somewhere to go, they feel they have someone to talk to, as they kind of navigate that roller coaster of adolescence into adulthood, and youth work's a really great space for that to happen.
And what are the trends that you're seeing amongst young people across Berkshire? We know that the press talks a lot about mental health issues that young people seem to be suffering from. Is that what you're seeing? And what do you think is helping?
Yeah, I think young people are probably more acutely aware than any other generation that's gone before them about the difficulties of balancing good mental health. Um, but I think there's also a way in which we talk about it now that I think has become unhealthy for young people, and become over prescriptive sometimes. Everyone has a journey with their mental health as much as they do their physical health. The number of times I've had a conversation with friends about, I need to go on a diet, or I'm starting a new diet, but we don't talk about mental health in the same way. We talk about, I have this issue or that issue, but we don't necessarily talk about it as a kind of flowing state. And I think it's really important for young people that we remind them that often our mental health can be situational. I get very anxious going into a room of people, but that doesn't mean I, Sarah, am anxious. It means I have anxiety about doing a certain thing in a certain situation. So I think it's really important that we continue that open narrative young people are happy to have, but make sure that it's really balanced about the things that they can control and how we can empower them to manage those things. Really important, as part of that journey. I think We also see young people are not immune to what we see in the adult world, cost of living, things that sort of we would, I guess, deem as impacting an adult population. Young people aren't immune to. They see the cost of living and how that impacts families. They see how that has changed maybe behavioural habits within their family unit, the pressure that faces on family, and sometimes the disruption and the stress that has caused families. Young people are in those family units and often see that, and that might play out with the parents working longer hours, which means young people are maybe left at home on their own more. It might mean that young people are seeing a different tension in their household. So we see those sorts of things playing out. And I think, the most obvious one will always be social media and how that influences young people. And I think it's a really broad spectrum. And I think often young people are, quick to engage with social media. And I think there are some great positives to the connectivity, but also the real kind of filter that is seen through social media, in terms of often young people will see a very filtered version of people's lives and what that looks like. And although we know this generation of young people is the most connected of any generation to date digitally, we also know it's the loneliest generation of young people. So it's really about helping young people to strike a balance between the digital world and the living world, and making sure that young people are still having those connections with friends, family, in places and spaces that are important to them.
And are there any partnerships or projects that you've worked on that Berkshire Youth has supported that has made a real difference to young people's lives that you're particularly proud of, that has helped either in keeping them out of crime, helping with loneliness, giving them skills, whatever it may be?
So I think Berkshire Youth is really fortunate in that our very basis is about collaboration. It's about collaboration with communities, it's about collaboration with young people, and we're really fortunate that we collaborate with a number of partners. So Berkshire Youth is quite unique in its setup. So we are a direct deliverer of services to young people. So we deliver youth services in places and spaces, so in youth centres or in schools, but we also are an infrastructure body, so we also support a number of smaller groups across the county who want to run some sort of provision for young people. So we will often have a phone call from maybe a faith group or some parents or a PTA saying, there's nothing for young people to do where we live, can you help? And so we have a fabulous staff team who will go and meet those people, who help them put the structures and the programmes in place to help that going. And that then means that youth work isn't just happening in big buildings in town centres, it's happening in our rural communities, it's happening in our underserved communities, and it's happening where young people are at. And I think that's a really important structure for Berkshire Youth, because Berkshire Youth isn't the solution for every young person in every community, but what we hold really proudly and dear to our hearts is the Berkshire Youth Network, which is that real collaborative piece about working with communities.
Have you got any feedback from a young person, perhaps a parent, where you've thought, I've really made a difference here, Berkshire Youth is changing lives?
Yeah, we often talk about the power of youth work and what that means in reality, and I often think as an organisation, it's a really tricky balance, because we're kind of the guardians of a young person's narrative, and often some of the biggest and most dramatic change for a young person comes from those young people who have maybe through difficulties or trauma have had quite a complicated journey, but also we don't want that to define them. And so often we find there's a real quiet success that can go on behind the scenes. There will be those great showcase moments where we will have young people who were dropping out of education, and because of the intervention of a youth worker, they're now back in education and are sitting their GCSEs this summer. Or we had a young person who was flirting with the lines of criminality and getting involved in the criminal justice system, but because a youth worker has spent time with them and supported them in that way, they've turned a corner and they're on a straighter path. But there's also hundreds of thousands of young people that have never got to that point because they've had a youth worker in their lives. They've had a trusted adult outside their home and outside of school who they can talk to, who they can get support from. And actually things have never escalated to need some of those statutory services. And I think that's probably the thing that I'm most proud of, is those sort of quiet and unseen kind of successes that happen every day.
And is Berkshire Youth able to keep up with the demand that you see from across the county to do something seemingly everywhere, and also those really serious projects to try to keep young people out of crime, perhaps dropping out of school, and perhaps really finding it difficult to get a job?
The short answer is no, Laura. We're not. I think, like every other charity, we rely on charitable donations and that income to be able to meet the need of our population. We know we are seeing rising numbers of exclusions here in Berkshire, and some of our exclusion figures in our local authorities are the worst in the southeast. Some of them are higher than national averages. We know there is rising numbers of young people being involved in crime, but the solutions to that don't come for free, and sometimes that's a really difficult place for a charity to be. Morally, I would work with every young person that walked through our door, or parent that reached out to us, but I also have staff who need wages to be paid and mortgages to keep, and so it's a really difficult balance for the organisation to make sure that we are working within our capacity. Lots of our staff work with troubled young people, really difficult circumstances, so we have to make sure that they have a really balanced workload that's well for them, which means we can't continue to take on young people, which sometimes is incredibly difficult when you know some of the challenges young people are facing. But we're hopeful, we're optimistic that this current government talks really positively about how it wants to invest in young people, and some of the programs it's suggesting that it will bring on board in the next couple of years could be really supportive for young people. Often the difficulty we have here in Berkshire is sometimes the perceived affluence of Berkshire does us a real disservice, that people think we're a very affluent county and therefore young people don't need support. But actually, I think on two big points that's really misguided. One, relevant affluence means that those without that income really struggle. The gap between those that have and have not becomes even larger. But also lots of things like mental health, parental relationships, friendships, aren't attributable by your household income. They affect every young person regardless of their background. And actually lots of our young people, because they live in maybe very socially mobile households with high incomes, the pressure on them to achieve and attain is incredibly high, and that can be really struggle for some young people. So I really hope that we get to a point where young people are recognised for, not for their postcode, but for the support that they need, and that we start to see some real positive changes from this government for young people.
I found some really interesting statistics on the Berkshire Youth website, and it was research conducted by the UK Youth Frontier Economics company. In 2022, they found that with correlation of investing in youth work, that £500 million would come about from decreased crime, which is astonishing. And then also an additional 1.7 billion with improved health, and then 0.8 billion increased employment and education. And it's difficult because you can't really see these things, but knowing that there's this evidence that if you invest in youth work, you invest in young people, then you get these really positive outcomes. But all people who work in youth work, I've always heard them say, there's not enough money at all, there's never enough investment. And I wondered if you see youth work and youth charities sort of trying to work more with businesses and other organisations to try to get income streams from there to try to fund this work. I know in Berkshire we're quite lucky. We've got quite a few successful companies, and I didn't know if that's something you're more focusing on.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Laura. I think often I describe to people this sort of public health model. If we try and push everything through our hospitals at that kind of acute end of services, hospitals are already at breaking point and they will very much break. So when we look at what health are doing, health have like GPs, they try and do more community-based interventions, but also we do lots of public messaging around, 5 a day, 5 a day fruit and veg, walk more, look after your physical health, look after your mental health. There's lots of programs around, dental hygiene, around making sure you get. So we take health on a big scale, and we look at lots of different touch points where we can reach people and engage with them. For young people, that model looks really different. We provide education for young people, and then we try and deal with them at the hospital end. We deal with them at the end where they need an intervention, where they need support and services, as opposed to coming back a bit and working in a preventative way. And that's what youth work has always been. Youth work has been a preventative thing. So to your earlier question about successes, our biggest success is those young people who don't need to go on and access mental health services, because actually they've been in an environment that supports them, that understands them, that they've been able to navigate that turbulence of adolescence without the need for statutory services. And the same goes for crime. Young people who are engaged in positive activities, who are engaged regularly outside of school, don't engage in crime. The cost of then dealing with that involvement in crime is really high. So to me, it makes perfect sense. Investing in youth work today will save you those costs longer term. But in a world that's driven by kind of politics and the bottom line, it's who's paying for that. And we can make the argument that investing for young people now saves a crime budget, but do the Home Office want to pay for something that they haven't yet incurred that cost? And so you kind of get stuck in this kind of political cycle for funding. In terms of local communities, Berkshire Youth was I guess really founded and based on that local philanthropy model. So going back 85 years, lots of the big local families saw youth work as a way of supporting their workforce and supporting the young people. So we knew in post-war Britain, lots of families were missing male role models in the house. Lots of females were then in the workforce, and this left young people without that kind of structured activity outside of education. And so what sort of lots of businesses did locally was start youth provision in their local towns or spaces, and opened it up to the children of their workforce. And they looked after those young people after school, they fed them, they provided activities. The employees worked longer and harder. Young people had positive things to do. Crime went down. Young people were more engaged in the business community. They often became, 2-3 generation families working for businesses because of that connection with their local community. And I'd love to get back to that point. And we have some examples of local businesses who are really great at that. We have a number of local businesses in Berkshire who support us because they understand that need, that young people are their future employees. Young people will be living in their communities. They'll be our homeowners. They'll be purchasing services so actually young people need to feel like they belong in our community, and a lot of the unrest from young people comes from that lacking sense of belonging, on an individual but also a community scale, in terms of where do I fit in. Our high street doesn't offer me for anything unless I've got, I can't, not welcome in pubs or restaurants. Cafes are really expensive. There's not a huge high street left, so where do I go? Young people congregate together. That's not seemed appealing either. So communities understanding that young people are our collective responsibility is super important, and we're really fortunate that we've got some businesses who really get that. We have lots of big global businesses in Berkshire. And sometimes that's quite a challenge because lots of global businesses, their kind of corporate social responsibility is seen on a global scale. So they will build wells in Africa or, something like that as their kind of thing, which is, very valid and very much needed. But it disconnects them from their local community and how their employees are seen and how their future workforce is seen. And so we really advocate for companies just to come and talk to us about how you can do more to support your community and do more to support your young people.
That's a fantastic history. I had no idea about that businesses were highly involved in supporting young people soon after the war. And you must be looking for volunteers all the time, Sarah. And if you are, and youth leaders as well, what can people do to apply, and what would they be doing if they were successful?
Or we can put them to lots of good use, Laura. So yeah, we're always on the lookout for volunteers. And because we are Berkshire wide, often we have projects and provisions that are quite local to people, which is really great. We appreciate volunteers' time is really precious. And that volunteering looks really different for different people. So we have volunteers who join our detached youth work, so they go out into parks and open spaces in the evenings and weekends and engage with young people in that way. We have volunteers who help run our community cafes. We have volunteers that get involved in youth group sessions. We have volunteers who are mentors for young people, so they help provide some more structured one-to-one support and guidance. So if you've got an interest around supporting young people and think that you could give back to young people, you can just get in touch with us and we will find out what your area of interest is, where you're based, and how you can get involved, and we'll support you through that journey. People can always email us, or our website is berkshireyouth.co.uk. You can find lots of information about us on there. We're also on social media as well, Berkshire Youth on social media. So you can find us and have a little look at what we do, and we'd be delighted to chat to anyone.
And I wanted to ask you about engagement from local councils and the police with Berkshire Youth, because I used to be a councillor on Woking Borough Council, and we used to always tear our hair out because whenever there was a consultation, we hardly got any opinions from young people at all. If there was a design for local planning with a park, again, we really struggled to get any input from what young people wanted themselves. And I wondered if their councils locally are proactive and coming to you to try to find those voices from young people, and also the police as well, to listen to young people and work with them.
I think we're getting better at it, Laura. I think we are, as a society, we're getting better at understanding that young people are experts of their own experiences, and actually if we want to engage them, that has to be meaningful. And I think what we often find for young people is they are surveyed to death over stuff, but they never see meaningful change. And so I think what we have become better at, and certainly what we advocate with local councils, is don't ask a question you don't want to know the answer to and that you're not willing to do something about. So if you're going to ask young people about what to do in an open space and they're going to say a skate park, but you don't want a skate park in there, don't ask them what it is that they want to do. Because if they're going to come up with something, or be really honest about why that's not feasible. Actually, the space isn't big enough, we don't have the right planning permission. But go back to them and engage them in that dialogue. I think too often seeking the opinions of young people is one-way traffic. You tell us, we go to young people and say, you tell us what it is that you want, and we take that away and we do something with it, and no one ever finds out about it. And then you kind of get a real apathy for engagement, and we talk about that on a bigger picture, don't we, about engagement in the political process and people voting and other people, how do people get that feedback and that engagement? And I think that's really important. But I think more than anything, we have to go to the people that young people trust to have those conversations with. And so I will often say to councils, sending out a household survey doesn't go past the person who either opens the post or opens the email. It doesn't go to anyone else. I don't know a single house that ever sits down and goes, around the dinner table, right? Everyone give me your opinion and let's feel this. It doesn't happen. And what's important to young people isn't necessarily what's important to their parents. And what's important to one household isn't important to another. So I think really investing in the views of young people, going to where they are at, going to the groups or societies, going to schools are fantastic, and will often really help you engage in that process, as long as it's meaningful and there's meaningful change coming from it.
Having a proper conversation rather than just a tick box exercise.
Exactly, yes.
I'm going to finish off with a question I ask everyone, and I'm intrigued by your answer. If you were Prime Minister, what would you change about the UK and why?
So I would push young people up the priority list. I think we have to be ambitious for our young people, and I think that takes brave leadership, because we have to set a journey for our young people, not for the end of a political term, but for the next 10, 20 years of their life. And I think the difficulty we have in politics is that if you are truly ambitious for our young people, you will see the net gains in 10, 20 years' time, which could be a different political party, which means someone else could be taking credit for your success. And I think that sets us up for a real short-term view in terms of young people. So I think if I was Prime Minister, I would have a much more ambitious view for young people for the next 20 years, and all policy must work towards that longer term vision for young people.
I was just thinking about how the Princess of Wales, she's done a lot on early years and really helped that up the agenda. She's got her early years business task force where she's got lots of major businesses to really commit to helping early years businesses and others. And I just wondered if something similar is needed for young people, obviously a lot older than the ones that you work with,
Yeah.
just to make sure that that's really focused on and has got that champion behind it.
I'm not going to lie, Laura. Often teenagers are not the most huggable and loving group of young people. And I get that. It's often a difficult group to go into bat for. But what we know is post-primary school, so age 11 plus, parental engagement for young people drops off in terms of what they do outside of school. They're more likely to travel independently, they're more likely to purchase independently, they spend more social time outside of the household. So there's a real shift in that dynamic. But we also see a real drop-off of services and opportunities for young people to engage in stuff outside the home. Whereas in that early years through to sort of the end of primary school, we see lots of activities going on, and I'm sure lots of people you will talk to and know about, guiding groups, scouting groups, overrun with people. You can't get in a football team for love nor money, drama groups are full, lots in that primary age. But then when young people have a sense of freedom, then opportunities for them kind of drop away. Now, there is actually statutory guidance that local authorities should secure the provision of youth work or youth activities for young people aged 13 to 19. That is there, it's a statutory duty, but it is not being fulfilled to the extent that it really should be. And it's challenging priorities for a local authority. I absolutely understand that. There's some real big issues. We have, rising adult social care, rising children's social care bills that are crippling lots of our local authorities. But I come back to that preventative. If we had more young people, more meaningfully engaged, more well supported, could we reduce that children's social care bill? And could we offer things differently? I would love to see a real advocate publicly and without getting political. I think if a royal gets behind it, things chivvy along a little bit quicker. We've seen that with the Princess of Wales around early years. We've seen that with the Prince of Wales around homelessness, and how we're making some really big political movements around, things like rough sleeping and accessibility to stuff. So I think whether you're a royalist or not, I think we can't underplay the importance of sometimes the role that they play in shaping some of those political decisions.
I remember doing my Duke of Edinburgh award, and There's the Princess Trust and Princess Foundation, who I know do amazing work with young
Yeah,
people as well. So they've got the foundation there. If there could be one that just champions it, maybe that could help. But thank you
absolutely.
so much, Sarah Emery, for talking with me on the Berkshire Heroes podcast. It's been brilliant to discuss these important issues with you.
Thank you, Laura.